Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case that we are going to cover today has been on my radar for the longest time. I swear I first discovered this case like 3 years ago, and for some reason it just kept getting pushed back, but we are finally covering this case today. And when I found out the facts of this case, all I kept thinking was, how did this happen? Because today's case, the perpetrator was working for the LAPD. Yes, she was a female police officer when she committed this crime. And she was really good at her job. She was a really good police officer. I mean, technically she wasn't, but to everyone around her, she was a really good police officer. She rose through the ranks, got promotion after promotion, got loads of rewards and recommendations. However, on the side of being a police officer, she was also an obsessive stalker. And this woman was Stephanie Lazarus, and she is the definition of the worst kind of jealous ex you can have. And she wasn't just a nightmare for her ex-boyfriend, she was also a nightmare for her ex-boyfriend's new wife. And one day, Stephanie committed an absolutely horrific crime whilst she was a police officer, and she used all of her knowledge and her skills to cover it up.
And now it almost sounds like you're trying to pin something on me. Now I got that sense. It just doesn't sound familiar.
And she was able to get away with her crimes for over 20 years, which just blows my mind. Today's case is such a huge miscarriage of justice. And Stephanie Lazarus, she will make your blood boil. So let's just jump in. So I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is HelloFresh. So you guys know how much I love HelloFresh. I have been using HelloFresh now for the longest time. And if you haven't tried HelloFresh yet, I highly recommend it. With HelloFresh, you get delicious recipes with fresh ingredients delivered right to your door. All of the ingredients come pre-portioned. They're separated into their own little bags. So you can literally just pull out your little bag from your cupboard and start cooking. There's also a recipe card in your box every week for every single recipe that you choose, and they are super easy to follow. They also have an amazing app that lets you easily manage your meals every week, and that is something that I love to do. I love looking through the menu. I love picking out my meals. I recently cooked the roasted sweet potato and kidney bean chili, and the vegetarian meals from HelloFresh are just absolutely incredible, and that chili is one of my favorites. There's just something about a chili that is just so satisfying and just so comforting. And also, one absolutely incredible offer that HelloFresh is offering you guys right now is the chance to get free appetizers for life. Yes, you heard that right. Free appetizers for life. And appetizers are an amazing way to spice up your meals. It makes you feel like you're eating at like a little fancy restaurant. You can get feta onion bites, veggie spring rolls. The choices are endless. And if you are in the UK, HelloFresh are offering free desserts, which are just as delicious. Next week, I have the blueberry and white chocolate tart arriving, and I am so excited because anything with white chocolate has my name written all over it. And if you guys wanted to try out HelloFresh for yourselves and take up these incredible offers, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code DanielleKirsty_apps for free appetizers for life, which means one free appetizer per box whilst your subscription is active. That's code DanielleKirsty_apps at HelloFresh.com for free appetizers for life. And that code can be used worldwide. And you guys can get a different special offer depending on where you're watching from. And using that code really does help out this channel because it lets HelloFresh know that you came from this video. So I just want to thank HelloFresh again for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Stephanie Lazarus was born on the 4th of May, 1960, making her a Taurus, and she grew up in Inglewood, California, where she lived with her parents Shelton and Carol and her 2 younger siblings. And growing up, Stephanie had a pretty normal childhood. There was a time where the family did struggle financially and things were pretty tough at that time, but apart from that, Stephanie's childhood was very positive. Stephanie did well at school, she had a load of friends, she was really into sports. She played pretty much every sport under the sun. She loved softball, basketball, tennis, and she excelled in sports. However, there was one problem that Stephanie faced when it came to her sporting life, career, whatever you want to say. And that was her dad. He was very demanding. He put a lot of pressure on Stephanie to perform. He would attend every single game that she was in, everything. He was always there on the sidelines shouting at either her to do better or at her coach. Stephanie could never just enjoy sports. There was always this pressure on her to be the best. And because of this made her relationship with her dad very uncomfortable because he wasn't really her dad. Every single moment of Stephanie's life, he was just always there, going on at her on how she needed to be better. And Stephanie felt incredibly uncomfortable around her dad, which caused a lot of daddy issues. And even though at times she really disliked her dad, like borderline hated her dad, she still wanted to please him. She was desperate to do anything that would make him happy. But unfortunately, nothing she ever did seemed to be good enough for her dad. And these daddy issues definitely have an impact on Stephanie, which you will see later on. And then when Stephanie was 15 years old, another significant thing happened to her, and that is that her parents got divorced. But not just that, following the divorce, Stephanie and her two younger siblings, they were forced to choose which parent they wanted to live with. Which I'm like, what the hell? How can you put that kind of decision on your children and force them to essentially choose, oh, which parent is your favourite? How traumatizing would that be for a child? And the age of the children at this point, so Stephanie is 15 and then her two younger siblings are only 13 and 11. But the two younger siblings, they ended up choosing to stay with their dad. But Stephanie, as we know, she has a very tense relationship with her dad. So maybe that had something to do with Stephanie's decision, because Stephanie chose to move out of her family childhood home and move in with her mom. And this was an incredibly hard adjustment for Stephanie, because she had gone from living as a family of 5 to now a family of 2. But that wasn't the hardest thing. For the rest of Stephanie's childhood, she barely saw her dad and her two younger siblings. It was like the divorce, the fact that the children chose which parent they want, it created this huge rift in the family and it completely split the family up. And this must have affected Stephanie. It must have done. But anyway, Stephanie's childhood continues. Nothing else really happens. She graduates high school and decides that she wants to go to college to become a lawyer. And in 1978, 18-year-old Stephanie went to UCLA and she moved into a dorm room on campus and she started living her best life. She was making a load of friends. She was going to her classes. She was really academically intelligent, so she was excelling there as well. And then whilst she was at college, she met someone very, very significant to today's case. And this was a man named John Rutan. So John was a sophomore in college, so he was the year above Stephanie, and he was studying medical engineering. He was also incredibly athletic and he played on a number of the college sports teams. And when they first met, Stephanie and John became incredibly close because they discovered that they had very similar interests, i.e. sports, fitness, because Stephanie, she's always had a love for sports. But that interest kind of did become a little bit of an obsession, and then now that she's in college, she is an exercise fanatic. She was on a load of varsity teams. She played basketball, tennis. She was on the athletics team. And she also spent so much of her time in the gym. She was always in the weights room where she spent so much time with John, and the two of them were just hanging out all the time. And as time was going on, Stephanie started to realize that the friendship that she had with John, it was something more than that. She started to have romantic feelings for John. However, the problem is that John didn't feel the same way back. Now, despite Stephanie's advances, because she was flirting her arse off every single time she was around John, John never reciprocated in any kind of way, never showed any interest above a friendship. And eventually, Stephanie kind of got a little bit fed up with this, so Stephanie asked a mutual friend to ask John if he liked her. And this is when John replied, quote, "She has an amazing body, but her face just doesn't cut it." And I'm like, wow, what a thing to say. Wow. But despite Stephanie's face, quote, not cutting it, John seemed insistent on leading Stephanie on for as long as possible, because he was aware now of how Stephanie felt and he liked the attention. So now when the two of them, Stephanie and John, would attend parties together, the two of them started making out, hooking up. They would always be fooling around with one another, staying up really late in the night talking. They would play basketball together, where Stephanie would very suggestively grind up against him when they were playing, and John definitely was enjoying this. And Stephanie, over time, because this is how John was being, Stephanie was becoming more and more obsessed with him. And in Stephanie's mind, John was now reciprocating these same romantic feelings. John was sending all of the right signs that he was also into her. So Stephanie started to become essentially a stalker. There's no other way to put it. Wherever John was on campus, Stephanie was there. And then this next part is so creepy. Stephanie would break into John's dorm room whilst he was sleeping, and she would take photos of him when he's asleep in his underwear. And she would take these photos and add them into her own private personal collection. But that's not all. No. Because when John would have a shower in the communal bathrooms, after sports and whatever, Stephanie would sneak in and steal his clothes. Meaning that John would get out of the shower and he would have no clothes and he would have to walk around naked trying to find them. And Stephanie would just be stood there watching. It's like, wow, talk about creepy. This is ugh. And Stephanie's behaviour just kept getting more and more creepy, more and more stalkery, but John just kept leading her on. John never once expressed that he wanted to cool off their relationship, he wanted things to slow down. John just continued to lead her on, and he just liked the attention. Or maybe Stephanie was just his insurance policy. Maybe John was thinking that if he couldn't find anyone else that fit his very high standards, he could just fall back and go with Stephanie. She was a sure thing. Maybe that is why he kept leading Stephanie on, because she would always be there. If he would click his fingers, she would come running. And their relationship just continued on. It actually got more and more boyfriend-girlfriend-like. John and Stephanie would spend a lot of one-on-one time together. They would go on road trips together, go on vacation together. John also took Stephanie to meet his parents. And John's parents, they fell in love with Stephanie, and Stephanie fell in love with them. Stephanie almost became a member of their family. She felt included in their family, and that is all she'd ever wanted since the age of 15 when her own family broke up. And the fact that Stephanie fell in love with John's family as well, this made Stephanie's feelings for John even stronger, because she could now see her future. She could see getting married to John, having children with him, being officially a part of this family. So Stephanie was more determined than ever to finally win John over. But the problem is that John just kept sending her mixed signals. The whole time that they were at college together, he was very hot and cold. He would pick her up, they would go to a party together, they would make out the entire night, and then he would just drop her and not talk to her again for another week. And the cycle would continue like that. And then 2 years later, John graduated from college and he left Stephanie behind, because obviously she still had another year to do. And Stephanie was left at college with no closure whatsoever. She still didn't know where she stood with John. So during Stephanie's last year at college, she just could not stop thinking about John. John was all she wanted. She would fantasize about John. She was pining after him. And she found out where he lived, and she just kept turning up at his apartment out of the blue again. Very stalkery. And eventually, after Stephanie just kept turning up at his apartment over and over again, what did John do? Did he do the right thing and say, listen, Stephanie, I'm not interested. I just want to be friends. Let's just keep it at that. Please stop showing up at my apartment. Did he say any of that? No. Instead, John decided to sleep with Stephanie. Because the whole time they were at college, they never slept together. It was just kissing, never really went further than that. But then, just this one night, John decides to have sex with Stephanie. And Stephanie thought that all her dreams had come true. However, that was not the case, because John still did not want a committed relationship with Stephanie. However, he was more than happy now to just call her up, bring her over to his apartment and sleep with her whenever he wanted, but he didn't want a relationship with her. But he let Stephanie think that that's what he wanted. He was using Stephanie to satisfy his sexual needs, continuing to lead Stephanie on. And I'm not saying Stephanie is innocent at all. Don't get it twisted. No, because she's a stalker, and obviously this video is about her. But I just want you to know that neither one of these two are innocent. So the pair continued to have sex on a regular basis, multiple times a week. Stephanie would go over to John's apartment and they would have this passionate night together. And I think it was at this point where Stephanie did assume that John was her boyfriend. Even though they never had that conversation, Stephanie thought that, yeah, they were now in a relationship. But John didn't see it like that. And what Stephanie didn't know is that John was also seeing multiple other women in the same way behind Stephanie's back. And obviously Stephanie didn't know. So eventually Stephanie graduates from college. And this is when the next really big significant thing happens in this case that has a huge impact on today's case. Because Stephanie was obviously at college. She wanted to be a lawyer. But she changed her mind. She thought that that was not going to be the career path that would suit her. Instead, she decided that she wanted to become a police officer. That was way more suited to her and her personality. She wanted a job that had a more fitness element to it. She was also really good with people, so she thought that being a police officer would be a really good career for her. And she passed the training program with flying colors, both physically and intellectually, and she settled into the force with ease. She was highly praised. She was really good at her job. She impressed everyone there. Stephanie was a very type A kind of person. She loved to be a high achiever. She was also very organized and detail orientated, and she was very good at her job. But it was while Stephanie was a police officer that she started to display a drastic change in her behavior. So remember that Stephanie, she's kind of a people pleaser. This all stems from her dad and how her dad raised her, and she just always wanted to please her dad. And this has kind of translated into her job. Stephanie craves the attention and the praise from her superiors, which definitely leads back to the dynamic that she had with her dad. Because Stephanie, she's now working in an incredibly toxic environment. We are talking the police force in the 1980s. It was very male-dominated, very misogynistic. I mean, it still technically is today, but can you imagine how bad it was in the 1980s? An incredibly racist environment as well. And women, especially, they were looked down on. It was thought that women couldn't do the job as good as a man. And Stephanie was determined to show that that wasn't true, which that's probably the only thing that I agree with her on. However, Stephanie went about this the wrong way, because instead of Stephanie proving herself with her good work, proving that a woman can do this job, she decided to become one of the boys. She was desperate to fit in with the men around her, and the men around her made incredibly inappropriate, disgusting, misogynistic, racist jokes, and Stephanie joined in. You know, she wanted to be different. She wanted to be one of the boys. So Stephanie started to make racist comments and racist jokes and sexist comments. She made incredibly degrading comments about women, possibly the women that were victims in crimes. She was determined to be seen as one of the guys and not just another woman on the force. She was essentially a pick-me girl. She was incredibly cocky and arrogant, and she thought that because she was a police officer, she was above the law. She started evading speeding tickets, committing petty crime herself that she knew that she'd be able to get away with. She used her status as a police officer to get away with things that a regular person never would have. She thought that she was untouchable. She is the exact kind of person that should never be allowed on the police force, her and many others. And whilst this behaviour change was going on, there was one thing that didn't change, and that was her obsession with John. Because at this point, Stephanie was currently 24 years old. She had first met John approximately 6 years ago. So she had been obsessed with John for a long time. And even though John wouldn't commit to her, because they were still having their on and off sexual relationship, even though John wouldn't commit to her, Stephanie refused to date anyone else. John was the only man in the world for her, and she refused to give up. She just thought to herself that she's just got to wait it out. Eventually, John will commit to her. Eventually, John will see the light and see how much of a good woman Stephanie is, and they will get married and they will run off into the sunset together and live happily ever after. However, that would not happen, because in the winter of 1984, John started dating another woman. And he started dating this other woman behind Stephanie's back. And this woman was named Sherry Rasmussen. And this would change everything. So Sherry was currently 27 years old. She was 2 years older than John and 3 years older than Stephanie. She currently worked in nursing, and everyone just said that Sherry was just incredible at her job. She was an incredibly caring person. She was good with people. And at only 27 years old, Sherry worked as the nursing director for the entire Glendale Adventist Medical Center in California, making her one of the youngest nursing directors in the entire country. Sherry was incredibly talented and hardworking. She had skipped grades back in high school. She had a master's degree from UCLA, and she had been promoted so many times in the last 7 years that she had been working in nursing. And in 1984, Sherry and John met at a party of a mutual person that they knew, and it is said that John fell for Sherry straight away. It was love at first sight. John described Sherry as incredibly beautiful and charming, and he just loved talking to her, loved being around her, and he asked for her number straight away. And after going on a few dates together, they were already in a very serious committed relationship, which is a shocker for John given his past. However, there was a problem, and that was Stephanie. Because at this point, John and Stephanie, they hadn't actually seen each other in a while. Their casual sexual relationship had seemed to be on the back burner for quite a while. However, a few months into John and Sherry's relationship, Stephanie decided to pop back up out of the blue randomly and throw John a surprise birthday party. Because this was very Stephanie-like. She had this habit of disappearing for a while and then just randomly popping up, which is exactly what she was doing now. So Stephanie arranged this surprise birthday party for John. She didn't invite Sherry because remember, John is seeing Sherry behind Stephanie's back, so Stephanie doesn't know about Sherry. So Stephanie has thrown this surprise birthday party for John. They're at this party, and Stephanie keeps hearing this name over and over again at the party. Sherry this, Sherry that. Oh, have you heard about John? He's seeing this girl called Sherry. And Stephanie was like, who is Sherry? Who the hell is Sherry? So Stephanie started asking around. Who's Sherry? What are you talking about? And this is when Stephanie discovered that John was in a very serious, committed relationship with this woman called Sherry. Now, to say that Stephanie was outraged would be an understatement. She stormed over to John and she was like, how dare you? How dare you get into a committed relationship with someone? How dare you not tell me? What about me? I thought we were in a relationship. How come you've never committed to me? Why not me? And John was just like, I don't owe you an explanation. We've never been serious. We've never been committed. And Stephanie left the party and she was completely heartbroken. And Stephanie now spent the next few weeks on the phone to John's mom, because remember, Stephanie's quite close to John's family, which is just so weird when you think about it. Like, it's just such a weird dynamic. So Stephanie is phoning John's mom repeatedly, and she's talking on the phone to John's mom, saying how devastated she is that John has a girlfriend, that Stephanie is the one for him, that she's so heartbroken. And I think we all know where this is going, because Stephanie is a crazy, obsessive stalker. Was she just going to leave John and allow him to be happy with his new girlfriend? No, because Stephanie saw this as a challenge. She was going to, without fail, win John back. So Stephanie started dropping by John's apartment all the time, out of the blue. Stephanie started making out to Sherry, who was obviously there at the apartment quite a lot, that Stephanie and John, they were just friends. So poor Sherry, she thinks that this whole situation is completely innocent. She thinks that this random woman, Stephanie, is just a friend of John's. And never, not once, did John mention to Sherry that they were basically ex-boyfriend and girlfriend. I know they never technically were, but the amount of times that they've slept together, I'm sorry, John should have told Sherry something. They basically were in a relationship without being in a relationship. And this is why I have a bone to pick with John as well, because he strung Stephanie on for so many years just to have casual sex with her, leading her on. And now he's with Sherry, and he doesn't even have the decency to tell Sherry who Stephanie really is. He just allows Stephanie and Sherry to talk, to be in the same room. It's just sick. And Stephanie really did think that she was getting somewhere doing this. She thought that if she could just keep showing up all the time, she could prize John out of Sherry's hands. But oh boy, was she wrong. Because in May of 1985, just 6 months after John and Sherry started dating, they got engaged. And Stephanie was outraged. This was like the worst news in the world to her. She could not believe that John was committing this seriously to another woman. Stephanie thought that her future was with John, that she was going to build this life, have this family with him. But this didn't deter Stephanie. I mean, she was heartbroken, but she was still determined to split the pair up. She just needed to take her plans into overdrive. So one evening, Stephanie turns up at John's apartment. Now, John and Sherry, they're still living separately, but they're about to move in together. But right now, John is still living on his own in his apartment. So Stephanie shows up and she's hysterical. She's crying. She goes storming into the apartment. She has a complete breakdown. And she starts saying to John over and over that she loves him. She loves him so much. Like, what is she going to do without him? He can't marry another woman. His future is with her. They have a special connection. Stephanie confesses that she has been in love with John for so many years. How did he not know? How did he not know that his future was with her? And John was just completely bewildered. He was like, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I don't feel the same. And it's like, wow, John, wow. Could you not have just said that at the beginning? Like, seriously. He knew. He knew without a shadow of a doubt how Stephanie felt. But Stephanie wasn't about to give up. She just kept saying, I just don't know how to get over you. I don't know how to move on. I'm so in love with you. And this is when Stephanie had like a light bulb moment. And Stephanie said, I know what will work. I know what will help me move on from you, John. I just need to have sex with you one more time. And I cannot believe I'm about to say this because John agreed. John is engaged to another woman, but he agrees to have sex with Stephanie just one more time to help her move on. Seriously, we all know that that is not why he's agreeing to have sex with Stephanie, okay? So Stephanie and John, they have another night of passion. John has now just cheated on his new fiancée, Sherry. But what do we expect? And obviously John vowed never to tell Sherry about this. Because at the end of the day, he was just acting out of good faith. He was just doing an act of service from the goodness of his heart. He was just helping this crazy woman, Stephanie, move on. But of course, the fact that Stephanie and John had sex, it doesn't stay secret for long because who decides to tell Sherry? I don't even need to give you multiple guesses, do I? No, because it was Stephanie. Of course it was. Stephanie, after she had sex with John, she was just rubbing her hands together, waiting for the moment to reveal to Sherry that her new fiancé has just slept with her. Because in August of 1985, this is just after John and Sherry have now finally moved in together. We are now just 3 months away from the wedding date. And Sherry is just at work like normal. And who shows up at her place of work? Stephanie. Sherry is just sitting there in her office as a nursing director going about her day when Stephanie arrives unannounced. And at this point, Sherry, she doesn't really know anything about Stephanie. The only thing that she knows is that Stephanie is kind of a friend of John's. She doesn't know about their sexual history. Sherry just thinks that Stephanie is just this weird random friend that just keeps showing up all the time. So Stephanie arrives in Sherry's office and she's basically wearing no clothes. I mean, she is wearing clothes, but Stephanie definitely wanted to make an impression. So Stephanie arrives at Sherry's office and she is wearing the skimpiest outfit that she could find. She's wearing the shortest shorts and the smallest, tightest cropped tank top. She's basically arrived in the office in like a bikini or her underwear. And she wanted to do this to flaunt her body in front of Sherry. Like, oh, look at me. Look at what your fiance has slept with. I'm so much better than you. So when Stephanie walks into Sherry's office looking like this, Sherry is like, what the actual hell is going on? And this is when Stephanie just blurts out the truth. She says to Sherry, I'm in love with your fiance. I've known him a hell of a lot longer than you, and I'm the one that he truly wants. And Sherry was shocked, but the revelations, they didn't stop there. Because this is when Stephanie revealed to Sherry that her and John had been sleeping together for years. And in fact, they were still having sex right now. The last time they had sex was just a few weeks ago when you were engaged. And Sherry, poor Sherry, she burst into tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her whole world just completely crumbled in front of her. And this is when Stephanie looked at Sherry and said, "If I can't have John, no one can, including you." Stephanie also then went on to say that she believed that Sherry's marriage to John would fail, and when it did fail, Stephanie would be there to pick up the pieces. And with that, Stephanie just turned around and walked out of the door. And Sherry was so devastated by what had happened. I mean, of course she was. She rushed home to John and demanded to know the truth, to which John said, yes, it was all true, and John had cheated on Sherry just a few weeks ago. And John started pleading for Sherry's forgiveness. John started saying that he had made a terrible mistake, and that John didn't realise how much he loved Sherry until now there was a risk of losing her, and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. And I'm like, really, John? You had to sleep with another woman to realise that? And after a few days of some very long talks, Sherry in the end decided to forgive John. And they still planned to get married just a few months later. But does the drama stop there? No, of course it doesn't, because this is Stephanie we are talking about. Stephanie was really hoping that her whole plan of telling Sherry that herself and John had slept together, that it would work in her favour and Sherry would split up with John. But it didn't. So now Stephanie would not leave Sherry alone. Wherever Sherry went, Stephanie was there. If Sherry went out to the grocery store, Stephanie would just randomly show up. If Sherry and John went out for a meal in a restaurant, Stephanie was there at another table staring at the couple. If Sherry was walking alone down the street, just a couple of paces behind her was Stephanie. Stephanie was probably showing up at her place of work. It was becoming incredibly creepy, but also scary. Can you imagine everywhere you turn, there is this stalker that has basically threatened you? Because don't forget that. Stephanie said, no one can have John, including you. And Sherry thought about reporting Stephanie to the police. However, the problem was that Stephanie was the police. Yes, it's probably very easy to forget that during all of this stalking, Stephanie has a full-time job as a police officer. So because of this, Sherry just felt powerless. And one time, just weeks before Sherry and John are about to be married, guess who turns up unannounced at their condo? Stephanie. She showed up again in very skimpy clothing. She was doing her best to try and entice John, but also intimidate Sherry. And this is when Stephanie asked John if he could wax her skis. And I was like, what? When I read that, when I was doing my research, I was like, what kind of innuendo is this talking about? I was like, no. But it's not. It's not. Stephanie actually pulled out her skis, like her actual skis, and asked John to help wax them. And I'm like, what? Who does that? Who does that? I seriously thought that was some sort of code or like some sort of sexual thing. That's what I thought, but no. So she handed over her skis to John and then she just turned around and left. Now, of course, this resulted in a huge argument breaking out between Sherry and John because Sherry didn't want Stephanie anywhere near them. Why the hell was Stephanie turning up at their condo unannounced and then asking for a favor from John? Especially because John had cheated on her with this woman. It's just unacceptable. But despite the fact that John, during this argument, had protested that Stephanie meant nothing to him, that she was dead to him, despite all of that, John waxed her skis. Yeah, you heard that right. John decided to wax her skis anyway. Why? Just throw them outside. Who cares? I'm sorry. No, John wants his cake and he wants to eat it too. A few days later, Stephanie returned to the condo to collect her skis. This time she is wearing her police uniform. Again, she probably did this as a form of intimidation. Sherry is already scared of Stephanie because she's a police officer, and Stephanie just wanted to remind her of that. And Sherry was so furious with John that John just allowed Stephanie to walk all over them like this. However, despite all of this drama, John and Sherry got married in November of 1985. And when I was doing my research, I was fully expecting to read about the wedding and read about some sort of drama to do with the wedding, that Stephanie had rushed into the church or wherever they got married and was shouting, "I object, I object." I was fully expecting that. I was fully expecting Stephanie to crash the wedding in some sort of way, or at least turn up. But no, she didn't. Surprisingly, Stephanie left the couple alone, left them to get married in peace, which is truly a shocker. But just because she left them alone to get married in peace, the problems are not over. Stephanie had one final horrific plan up her sleeve. And this is when we now are about to get to the devastating events of today's case. Because in the month after John and Sherry's wedding, Stephanie was becoming incredibly agitated. She had tried to move on. She even tried to find herself a new boyfriend. She placed dating ads in the local newspaper that said, quote, 25-year-old UCLA grad, very athletic, loves to travel, seeks tall athletic male, 21 to 31, who likes to travel and has a good sense of humor. Stephanie was basically trying to find her John. Like, she was trying to find someone that looked like John, that acted like John, and everyone that she dated, she always compared them to John. And in Stephanie's eyes, no one compared to him. Stephanie would write a lot in her journal about how lonely she was and that she just didn't know how she was going to move forward with her life. She also started underperforming at her job. She was being reprimanded all of the time by her senior officers because she was making mistake after mistake. She also was becoming more violent and angry on the job. And as a police officer, that is a no-no, as well as becoming incredibly desensitized to the violence that she was obviously coming across during her job. But not just that, she still continued to turn up unannounced at John and Sherry's condo. And Sherry understandably was getting so angry and just so fed up. This was her first month into married life. She just wanted to be happy and enjoy her life, enjoy her husband, but Stephanie wouldn't allow it. There was even one time when Sherry returned home from work early and John wasn't home. So she assumed that the house was empty because no one else should be there. But then Sherry walked in, and who was sat there in the living room? Stephanie. Stephanie was sat there in her police uniform with her gun out. She had just shamelessly broken into their condo without a care in the world, abusing her power, intimidating Sherry in her police uniform and her gun. Sherry and Stephanie got into a huge argument, and Sherry said, "I'm going to call the police." And Stephanie just burst out laughing in her face and was like, "I am the police." And Sherry was so terrified for her life in that moment. However, Stephanie walked out of the door. She had the biggest smile on her face and she casually said to Sherry, "I'll be back." We now get to the 24th of February, 1986. And this is sadly the day where the tragic events of today's case take place. Now, on this morning, Sherry and John, they woke up together. It was 7 a.m. John got ready for work. However, Sherry was feeling a little bit under the weather on this day, so she decided not to go into work. So Sherry was left at home on her own. And then at 10 a.m. on that morning, guess who showed up to the condo? Stephanie. Now, if you ask me, Stephanie was clearly waiting outside of the condo, and she clearly saw that Sherry didn't leave the condo, and she saw that this was her opportunity. So Sherry, she was upstairs, she was in bed, she was not feeling well, and Stephanie quietly entered the condo, and Sherry had no idea that she was there. And Stephanie quietly started to make her way upstairs. However, by the time Stephanie made it to Sherry's bedroom, Sherry had actually climbed out of bed and she was actually about to make her way downstairs. And without hesitation, Stephanie pulled out her gun. And I just want to add that this was Stephanie's police issue gun. So it's not like she was trying hard to cover her tracks or anything. No, she's using her own police issue gun for this. And this is when Stephanie just started shooting at Sherry. Now, the first two shots actually missed. The first shot hit a glass door behind Sherry, completely shattering it, which made Sherry start screaming in panic. And this is when Sherry made a run for it. She clearly saw that it was Stephanie that was firing shots at her, and she barged past Stephanie and ran downstairs, trying to make her way to the panic button. But Stephanie was too quick for Sherry. She blocked her way and aimed her gun at her again. But this is when Sherry lunged at Stephanie and actually got Stephanie in a headlock and pointed the gun away away from her. But Stephanie was not about to give up. So even though Stephanie is in a headlock, she bit down hard on Sherry's arm, causing Sherry to release her grip on her headlock because she was in so much pain. And then Stephanie picked up a heavy vase and smashed it over Sherry's head. Sherry fell to the ground. She was completely overpowered. She no longer could put up a fight. She was so disorientated from the hit on her head from that vase. And this is when Stephanie raised her gun once again and aimed it at Sherry and shot her in the chest. Sherry screamed out, but there was nothing that she could do. Stephanie grabbed a nearby blanket and wrapped it around her gun to silence the sound. And then Stephanie shot Sherry 2 more times in the chest. And this is tragically when Sherry Rasmussen lost her life. And this just breaks my heart because Sherry lost her life so needlessly because Stephanie couldn't get over her obsession with John. And Stephanie is so evil, using her police uniform as intimidation. But Stephanie wasn't done there. No. This is when Stephanie quickly got to work to stage a crime scene. At least stage a different crime scene. Because obviously Stephanie is a police officer. She has been to more crime scenes than most people. She knows what a crime scene looks like. She knows what a burglary gone wrong crime scene looks like. So this is what Stephanie does. She trashes the place. She turns that place upside down, emptying drawers, smashing belongings. She wants the police, when they come across this scene, to think that some random person has broken in, and Sherry just so happened to be there. Burglary gone wrong, and Sherry got caught in the crossfire. However, when Stephanie is trashing the place, she comes across John and Sherry's marriage certificate. And Stephanie says to herself, yep, I'm going to take that. That is mine. And I'm like, really? Really? Why would you do that? She wants to get away with this murder. Why the hell would she steal a marriage certificate? Who steals a marriage certificate? I'm sorry, that was so stupid. And also, does Stephanie really think that if she steals their marriage certificate, it would mean that they're no longer married? It doesn't work like that. So after trashing the place, Stephanie does steal the car keys to Sherry's new BMW, which was an engagement present from John. And I think it's very significant that she steals the engagement present from John. And Stephanie uses the BMW as a getaway car. So Stephanie has obviously now fled the scene and the day continues on as normal. However, people are starting to become very concerned about Sherry because John has been trying to get in contact with his wife all day. I mean, she's sick at home. He wants to know if she's okay. But he's also not too concerned because he probably just thinks that she's having a nap. She's in bed. She's just not feeling up to talking. So John returns home from work at 6 p.m, which is 8 hours after the murder. This is when he comes across the horror scene and the murder of his wife. Now, he immediately dials 911. The police came out, which was thankfully not Stephanie, and I'm very surprised about that because I truly thought that Stephanie was going to try and worm her way into this investigation, but clearly she didn't because she has at least some brains. But when the police got there to investigate, they thought that this was a burglary gone wrong. That was the conclusion that they jumped straight to. They didn't even consider anything else. They played straight into Stephanie's hands. But the first thing that they had to do was rule John out as a suspect. I mean, he is the husband. He is probably the one most likely to have done this murder. So they bring him in for questioning. However, he has a solid alibi. He was at work all day. But they started to grill John in the interview room, asking him, could anyone have done this to Sherry? Does anyone have a grudge against Sherry? Does anyone dislike her? Any family feuds? Anything? And of course, the answer is so bloody obvious. Stephanie. John knows that Stephanie doesn't like Sherry. Stephanie has been stalking John for years and now she's been stalking Sherry for months. Stephanie has been showing up at the condo unannounced. Sherry has expressed that she is scared of Stephanie. So the answer is glaringly obvious. Stephanie. However, when John answers this question, does anyone hold a grudge against your wife? John just responds, no, I don't think so. And it's like, really? Really? Are you being bloody serious here? I'm sorry, I do not buy that John is that stupid. I don't. He knows. How the hell do you not bring up your crazy, stalkery kind of ex-girlfriend that you cheated on your fiancé with and that has now been stalking both you and your new fiancé or new wife? How do you not bring them up? John knows. I'm sorry, he does. He's not that stupid. I do not believe that Stephanie's name just slipped his mind in this moment. I don't. And because of this huge omission from John, the police have no other suspect. They have to go with the theory of burglary gone wrong. They didn't even try to investigate any alternative motive. If I'm being completely honest, they wanted to make their lives as simple as possible because there were so many signs to contradict the theory of a burglary gone wrong. I mean, first and foremost, basically nothing was stolen. I mean, yes, a car was stolen, which was a pretty big thing, but other than that, nothing was stolen. The whole place was completely trashed and turned over, but nothing was stolen. Valuables were still left in the house. The only things that were stolen was an engagement present, which just so happened to be a car, and then a marriage license certificate. Does that really sound like 2 items stolen by a random person? No. If you steal someone's marriage certificate, that is personal. Who does that? But not just that, the attack on Sherry was very personal. The bite mark on her arm, the fact that she was shot 3 times in the chest. There were bruises all over her, suggesting that there had been some sort of fight. The injuries that she had didn't line up with a burglary gone wrong and a murder had happened because of panic. But the police didn't care about any other theory. So Stephanie, being all cocky and confident, just continued to get away with her crimes. A few days later, she dusted Sherry's stolen BMW for prints. She dumped it a few blocks away from her house. The police found it and no one seemed to question anything. Stephanie also reported that her police issue gun was stolen because obviously that gun was now a murder weapon, and again no one seemed to think that this was suspicious. And if the police had just looked at the crime scene a bit more carefully, they would have realized that the bullets that were found at the scene of the crime of Sherry's murder were an exact match to Stephanie's police issue gun. But not just that, Stephanie gained access to all of the files regarding the case. She obviously did this when no one was looking, and she went through all of the files, all of the pages, all of the notes, and she removed every single page that even referenced her name. So if any detective went through the files looking at this case, Stephanie Lazarus's name would not be anywhere. There was no link made between Stephanie and John and Sherry, and therefore no one would suspect Stephanie. So the days passed, then the weeks passed, and there was no suspect in Sherry's murder. John, whose new wife has just been murdered, he didn't really seem to care that much, but Sherry's parents were devastated. They offered up a $10,000 reward to anyone that had any information regarding Sherry's murder. Sherry's parents also kept going to the police to tell them that their daughter had a stalker. Sherry's parents knew that someone was following their daughter everywhere that she went because Sherry was absolutely terrified of Stephanie, so of course she told her parents that she had a stalker. However, unfortunately, when Sherry was telling her parents about this crazy stalker that she had, she never mentioned Stephanie's name. So her parents knew about the stalker, but they didn't know the stalker's name. So even though her parents were going to the police and saying, listen, our daughter had a stalker, you need to look into this, they didn't have a name, and therefore they couldn't give Stephanie's name. So again, Stephanie's identity was still a mystery. However, a detail that Stephanie's parents knew was that this stalker that their daughter had worked for the LAPD. So because the LAPD were not really taking this case seriously, they weren't listening to Sherry's parents about this so-called stalker, Sherry's parents started accusing the LAPD of a cover-up, saying that they were just protecting one of their own. And detectives on the case just laughed in Sherry's parents' faces, saying that they were crazy conspiracy theorists. There was no way that a police officer could have committed this murder. They were completely ignored. They were made into a joke. And I have to stop and question right now, was it a cover-up? We just don't know. It does seem a little bit suspicious that the police force, they didn't even look into this murder seriously. Between the police and John, there is something fishy going on here. And this is what I mean when I say that this murder of Sherry is just a huge miscarriage of justice. Her parents are literally screaming from the rooftops that this was not a burglary gone wrong, but no one is paying attention, no one cares, no one's listening. So now we skip forward to 1989, which is 3 years after the murder. The case has now gone completely cold. There was no leads, no information, nothing. Stephanie is still a serving police officer, and at this point she has well and truly gotten away with murder. And this next thing that happens is just so unbelievable. It makes my blood boil, because guess what happens? Stephanie and John, they rekindle their love. Well, should I say love on Stephanie's part, but oh my God. How can John do that? He knows. I'm sorry, there is nothing in the world that can convince me that John doesn't know that Stephanie murdered Sherry. No. How can he do this? So John and Stephanie, they go on vacation together. They go to Hawaii on a little romantic trip. They pick up their sexual relationship where they left off. And it's just unbelievable. I am so angry. How can either one of them do this? I mean, Stephanie, yes, but John, his wife has been murdered. How can he go away on holiday with her murderer? I mean, obviously, let's just play devil's advocate here and pretend that John doesn't suspect Stephanie. Regardless, it is still messed up. So they return from their vacation and their relationship doesn't last too much longer. It actually fizzles out quite quickly. They didn't go on and get married or anything like that, which is what I was expecting. Instead, John actually meets another woman and gets remarried, and Stephanie actually moves on and finds herself a new man and gets married to him, which is so shocking to me because Stephanie has been obsessed with John since the moment she has met him. She murdered an innocent woman because of her obsession. And now all of a sudden she's moved on. What's all that about? Like, why? What was the point of it all? Makes me think that her problem and her obsession and jealousy was more to do with Sherry than maybe John. I don't know. So Stephanie's new husband was a man named Scott, and he also worked for the LAPD. And once the couple were married, they adopted a little girl. So now Stephanie is a mother. And Stephanie just continues on living her life, working for the LAPD, continuing to thrive at her job, getting promotion after promotion. She was actually promoted to being a detective. And it's like, wow, she's a murderer. And unbelievably, I cannot believe that I am saying this, but 15 more years pass. And Sherry's murder case is as cold as a cold case can get. Her parents have no closure. No one is listening to them. Everyone is gaslighting them into thinking that it is a burglary gone wrong and, oh, it's just one of those things, we can't find the murderer. And it just makes me so angry because Stephanie has just gone on to live her life. She's had a very successful career. She's now married. She has a family. She has now been promoted to an art theft detective. She earns very decent money. She got to have the life that Sherry was never given the chance to live. But don't worry, her downfall will eventually come. Although unfortunately, it still takes longer than it should. And this downfall started to happen when DNA testing started to become more frequently used. Because obviously this murder happened in 1986. DNA basically wasn't a thing back then. It had only just been used for the first time really in investigations here in the UK, and it would still be a very long time before it became mainstream. However, in 2004, 18 years after Sherry's murder, a DNA analyst called Jennifer Francis decided to reopen Sherry's cold case. And Sherry's case was pretty much dead and buried. But thank God Jennifer decided to do something about this case because there were DNA samples missing from Sherry's case. And the DNA samples that were missing were the samples taken specifically from the bite mark in Sherry's arm. Because if you remember, Sherry had Stephanie in a headlock and Stephanie bit down on Sherry's arm. Well, police had recovered a sample of the saliva of the attacker from Sherry's arm, but that saliva sample was just never tested. And this sample had somehow become lost in the massive freezer in the LAPD. Suspicious, isn't it? And no one had bothered to recover it. No one cared. Everyone that worked on the case, everyone that came in contact with the case just thought that it was too much hassle to try and find this sample. They thought that the case should just remain closed and let's just move on. Now, if you ask me, that also sounds like a cover-up. However, Jennifer, she was persistent. She was like, no, we need to find this sample, because now with the advancements in technology and the fact that we can test this sample, we could find the murderer. And Jennifer thankfully found someone to help her, and she found the sample. However, when Jennifer ran it for DNA testing, she didn't get a match because Stephanie wasn't in the database. However, Jennifer did make a massive breakthrough, because even though she didn't find an exact match, it was discovered that the DNA belonged to a woman. And that was a huge, huge breakthrough, because for all of these years, the theory was burglary gone wrong. A lone male broke into the house and murdered Stephanie because they panicked. No one suspected that the murderer was a woman. However, now there is confirmation that it was a woman. So this whole theory of burglary gone wrong was thrown out of the window. Not that a woman can't commit a burglary, but that theory was thrown out of the window, and the police were forced to look at other theories. However, despite this, Jennifer still couldn't find a detective to take the case seriously. So 5 more years pass. So it has now been 23 years since the murder. Stephanie is nearly 50 years old at this point, and she has gotten away with murder for 23 years. However, in 2009, a detective called Phil Morritt took over the cold case, and he was finally going to do something about this. And Phil assembled a team. He forced everyone to look at the murder of Sherry from a new angle. The fact that it was a woman that was a murderer. And he knew that the fact that the murderer was a woman was very important to the case. So when Phil was going through all of the notes on the murder, he noticed that Sherry's parents had repeatedly told police that Sherry had a stalker, and that this stalker was a jealous love rival that was also a police officer. And Phil thankfully took this seriously. He's like the only one that did. And after looking at the crime scene photos, it became more and more obvious that the crime scene was staged, which also pointed to the direction that the murderer had extensive knowledge about crime scenes, meaning that they could have been a police officer. So Phil instructed his team to pour through every single document relating to this case, go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. He wanted to know about every single woman that John had ever come in contact with. And this is when Phil finally found what he was looking for. Because even though Stephanie had tried her hardest to remove her name completely from this case, there was one single reference to a woman called Stephanie Lazarus, who was John's ex-girlfriend. Stephanie had missed this one reference to herself, and because of this, this would be her downfall. And I am so glad that she missed that reference to herself, because imagine if she had gotten every single reference to herself removed. This murder possibly still would not be solved. So then Phil looked up the name Stephanie Lazarus and realized that she was a police officer, and she had been a police officer in 1986, which fit the theory that Sherry's parents were saying all along. But not just that. Phil was stunned by the next revelation, because Phil realized that Stephanie Lazarus was still a current detective, and that she worked in the exact same office as him, which must have been the most surreal, crazy moment for him. Because imagine, you've just opened a cold case, you're investigating it, and the main suspect is a fellow officer that works with you. Now, Phil couldn't exactly go storming up to Stephanie and throw around accusations. He needed proof. And how was he going to get proof? And that was Stephanie's DNA. They already had the DNA profile of the murderer on the database. They just needed to find the match. And if they found the match, this would be the smoking gun. But Phil couldn't exactly just walk up to Stephanie and say, "Hey, can you spit in a cup?" And what he did just sounds like it's come straight from a detective, police, TV show or movie. Because what Phil did is that he set up a team to follow Stephanie. And they followed Stephanie for days. And one day Stephanie was leaving Costco and she was drinking a drink, like through a straw. She was drinking her Coke and she finished it and she threw it in the trash. So Phil's team then went to the trash and retrieved the cup that obviously had her saliva on and her DNA. They sent this cup off for testing, and 1 month later, the results came back, and it was a complete 100% match to Sherry's murderer. And that was the concrete proof that they needed, that Stephanie Lazarus was the murderer and she had gotten away with it for 25 years. And to top all of that off is that she was a police officer for the entire time. Which now brings us to our next problem, because they now need to arrest Stephanie, bring her in for an interview and investigate. But the problem is that Stephanie was a police officer and she was allowed to carry a gun with her 24 hours a day. And detectives were worried that if they went to arrest Stephanie, she would be armed and there could be a gunfight. However, this is when Phil came up with an ingenious plan. Because when a police officer does an interview for a suspect or a witness or anyone, when a police officer goes into an interview room, they are not allowed to be armed. They have to check in their gun and go into the interview room. So one day, Phil just casually walked up to Stephanie and just said, "Hey Stephanie, I have a suspect in custody who knows something about an art theft, which is your area of expertise. So I was wondering if you could help me out on this, help me interview this suspect." And Stephanie, she loves attention, especially from superiors. And she was like, oh, yes, you need my help. Of course I'll come and help. So Stephanie suspects nothing. And she has been lured to the interview room on false pretenses. So Stephanie, she goes to the interview room, she checks her gun in, and then she sits down expecting to interview a suspect. Stephanie has played right into their hands. And this is when the interview of Stephanie Lazarus begins. And you can actually see the full interrogation of Stephanie on YouTube, and it is absolutely unbelievable. But I will admit, it's very satisfying to watch. So to begin with, the detectives, they're acting all casual. In the beginning, Stephanie still believes that they're about to bring in a suspect for her to interview. She has no idea that she is about to be interrogated. So the detectives, they start off with some small talk. Stephanie just thinks that it's all casual, nothing to be concerned about.
Hey, great.
Hi.
Stars, nice to
Yeah,
meet
see you guys.
How's it going?
And then all of a sudden, the detective turns to Stephanie and says, "Do you know anything about John Rutan?"
Oh, okay.
Do you know John Rutan?
John Bruton. John Rutten?
And at this point, Stephanie tries not to show it, but it is so obvious that she is panicking. The penny at that moment must have dropped. She must have realized what was going on here, because her breathing changes, her whole demeanor changes. And they start questioning Stephanie about John. They ask Stephanie, "Did you ever date John?" And Stephanie's reaction is so hilarious because she thinks she's outsmarting the detectives, but so infuriating at the same time. Because when she's asked, "Oh, did you ever date John?" Stephanie is like, oh, gosh, maybe about a million years ago, I think. It's like ancient history. I can barely remember.
You said you dated John. How long did you guys date?
I mean, what, are you guys, is this something, I mean, you said I was going to interview somebody about art, and how you guys are, you know, God, that's been a million years ago. I mean, what year is it now? 2009? I mean, I graduated in 82, yeah. You know, we dated, I dated other guys, I'm sure he dated other girls, geez. I couldn't even say. I mean, I started school there in 78. Mm-hmm. I started UCLA in 1978. Mm-hmm. I graduated in 82. I don't even remember what year he graduated, if it was a year or two before me.
Okay.
I think he was a little bit older than I was. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I can't remember if he was born, let's see, I'm born in 1960. I don't know if he was born in 58 or 59. I mean, I knew his parents, I knew his sister, his brother went to Northridge. Mm-hmm. You know, his sister had spent the night at my house before. Obviously, I spent the night at his house before. He probably spent the night at my house before. You know,
Stephanie really tries to make out that the man she basically stalked for 10 years, she can't remember him. Detectives are obviously not having any of it. They continue to push her. So they say to Stephanie, "Well, did you know that John's wife was murdered?" And Stephanie must have been dying inside. She must have been thinking, "Oh my God, they know." But Stephanie just replies, "Oh, golly gosh." That was so long ago. That was like 1,000,000 years ago. If you watch the interview footage of her, she says gosh, oh gosh, a lot, even though she's not British, but you know what I mean. But Stephanie just pretends to act like she doesn't know who Sherry is. She can't really remember it. It's so long ago. John is just a random person that she did kind of hook up with, fool around for a little while in college, but it was 1,000,000 years ago.
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Okay.
Okay. Did you know her?
Not really. I mean, I knew that he got married years ago.
Uh-huh. Did you ever meet her?
God, I don't know.
Do you know who she was or anything?
Well, let me think. God, it's been a long time ago. I may have met her. Geez. You know.
Yeah.
And eventually, after the questioning went on for a while, Stephanie really did think, oh crap, they know what I did. She cracks. She knows that she can't keep up this act of playing dumb. And this is when Stephanie finally says, I think I need a lawyer. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I need a lawyer and I'm going to leave.
We understand that. I mean, if we were in your position, I mean, we would feel the same way.
I just can't even believe it. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'm shocked. I'm really shocked that somebody would be saying that I did this. I mean, we had a fight, and so I went and killed her. I mean, come on.
Well.
That's...
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks for giving me the courtesy. I wish I...
So Stephanie actually gets up to walk out of the interview room. However, there is a police officer waiting for her on the other side of the door, and they arrest Stephanie Lazarus for the murder of Sherry. Stephanie is then marched back into the interview room. She is obviously now arrested and charged, and it's just so satisfying to see. It really is that Stephanie is finally in handcuffs, finally after 25 years.
Have a seat, Stephanie.
This is insane.
Okay.
So the investigation went on for a while. They gathered as much evidence as they could against Stephanie, and the trial was 3 years later. And thankfully, it was a pretty straightforward trial. It was pretty cut and dry. Stephanie's lawyer's only defense was to try and discredit the DNA evidence, saying that because of how much time has passed, etc., that it was unreliable. However, this didn't stick, and Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. And I'm obviously very thankful that she was found guilty of murder. I am, but it was 25 years too late. Stephanie lived her life. She got married, she had a family, she had a successful career. And what did Sherry get? None of that. So Stephanie was sentenced to 27 years in prison, which honestly is not enough in my opinion, because this was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. She covered it up, and the fact that she was a police officer makes it 1,000,000 times worse. So 27 years is not long enough in my opinion. However, the most infuriating thing about this case is that Stephanie was offered parole just last year. Now, thankfully, it was overturned on appeal, but I think the fact that she was granted parole once, it's probably only a matter of time until she is granted parole again. So for right now, Stephanie is still in prison, but for how much longer? And it just makes my blood boil, because at this moment, Stephanie has only served 12 years in prison. She was sentenced in 2012. So she's only served 12 years for a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. And if she gets out soon, she's still only in her 60s. She will still get to live the rest of her life with her family. And I'm just like, how is that fair? And I know you're probably all thinking about John, like what happened to him? Because oh my God, he infuriates me so much. Yes, he's not a murderer, okay? He's not as bad as Stephanie, but he is in no way innocent here. In my opinion, John could have helped solve this murder when it happened. He could have redeemed himself from all of the terrible things that he did prior to that. John knew what Stephanie was like. John knew that Stephanie was stalking Sherry. And if John had just given over Stephanie's name, Stephanie would have been caught and placed in prison. And I feel so sorry for Sherry's parents, I really do, because they were ignored for so long about who murdered their daughter. And I actually found out that they have both passed away in the last 5 years, which is just so heartbreaking. And I know it will never make up for the loss of their daughter, but I just hope that they got some sort of closure when Stephanie was obviously arrested and found guilty and sent to prison. And I just want to end this video remembering the victim of today's case. Sherry Rasmussen was described as a kind, gentle, compassionate, and extremely caring person. She was incredibly talented and hardworking. She became possibly the youngest nursing director in the country at one point. She was amazing at her job, and she spent her whole life caring for people. She was absolutely adored by her parents, and she was taken far, far too soon. She was only 29 years old. So as always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions on today's case. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.